Hello, this is Philosophy for the People with Ben Burgess and Stefan Bertram. You can tell which one is which by reading the text below our names, our images, or just by having a vague idea of who Ben Burgess is. Probably not likely to confuse us.
Fair enough.
And this week, we're going back to a tried and tested format of at least one time in the past of me asking Ben questions off the Phil paper survey.
Yes, yes. There's no new essay this week. I will say we unlocked the one from that went behind the paywall about 6 months ago. The Thinking Harder About Justice, Rawls versus Cohen versus Marx. That's the thumbnail behind me. So if you want to do some reading this week, that is available now. But we're not going to talk about that. We've already talked about that. So we are going to be talking about these Phil paper survey questions. And I should say I lied in the description. I said there'd be 25. And Stefan informs me that 25 was kind of almost too many last time for the format. So
I haven't bothered to make a new document. I made a document 47 last time, and that's the first 25. So we're getting the last 22 now.
Okay, I thought there was actually a thought out reason for this, but all right, fair enough.
Yeah, no, these are just the worst questions I found less interesting.
We really have to have a conversation about promotion and like how to get people to keep watching the stream. I think that's not it.
I was going to ask you. I don't. Maybe the answer is you don't.
You asked me the obvious stuff last time. I mean, now we're really getting into the treasure gems.
No, it's true. There is like deep cuts now. Yeah. And questions where we both might say, "Well, that sounds very interesting. I've got no idea."
Fair enough. Well, I hope.
I was going to ask you before that, though.
It's going to be good TV, but let's see.
Well, maybe the answer is you don't really know about the format, or but what do you think of the Phil Papers survey?
What do I think about it? I mean, I kind of glanced at it before we talked about it before, but I don't know. I mean, based on the conversation we had last time, those 25 questions, I think most of them were pretty interesting and and a pretty good, sort of things that I'd want to know about what people thought. I will say some of them struck me as really odd inclusions, like the thing about like whether worms can think or whatever. It's like, well, what? That's not really. That seems like more of an empirical question, and it's not really one that most of the people you're surveying have been likely to spend time thinking about. But whatever.
I think that's one of my favorite questions, actually, just going through a list of like slowly more and more stupider questions, being like, is it conscious? Is it conscious? Is it conscious? But I meant in the sense rather that, it is an attempt to be a global kind of philosophy survey, but obviously isn't. And that the questions are like analytic in nature, and the answering population isn't necessarily all analytic, but they all basically are English speaking, obviously.
Sure. Yeah. We're not probably nobody who probably no monolingual French speakers who teach at Paris 8 were taking this survey, and now we'll just never know whether they think worms are conscious.
One day maybe, but I think it's a very interesting effort because it's not something that any other, there's a physicist will do the thing where sometimes they'll make a survey asking like one question, which is also on this paper, like about interpretations of quantum mechanics or whatever. But I think kind of like a systematic whole discipline effort. I'm not aware of any other of them at least.
Fair enough.
The first question is philosophical progress. Is there any? None, a little, or a lot?
A little.
A little. Yeah, I mean, definitely there's a lot of progress in at least like the number of theories. But also I think, we definitely do know there's just more stuff we know now, especially like in terms of logic and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a certain sense in which my instinct on this is going to be no. There's not just because I don't, I think sort of thinking of basic philosophical questions on the model of like a body of empirical knowledge that we like accumulate more of over time. I think that's probably just a bad model, for what we're doing here. And I think a lot of the questions have a way of being perennial, and I think it's in the nature of a lot of this stuff for people not to achieve consensus on them in the way that they do for other fields of study. Um, and there are obviously arguments I find more or less convincing, but that's a different question from, oh, well, here we just established it, and now everybody's going to agree, which is not really normally how this works. But yeah, there's a sense in which there's progress, if only in, well, certainly the sense you already suggested, which is that you, over time, you at least get a much better developed sense of what the options are.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, it's crazy that I guess we didn't really have like a fully worked out theory of consequentialism before like the 18th century, which is now like something that lots of people who aren't philosophers will say like, well, that's obviously how morality works.
right. Yeah, no, exactly. And then, of course, there's scientific progress and those branches of philosophy where it's relevant. Sort of as our knowledge of other things progresses, then the ways that people ask and answer philosophical questions bounce off that in different ways, right? So that's kind of parasitical progress. But yeah, I mean, certainly, if nothing else, people have a much better developed sense of what different positions are on different topics, and how they relate to each other and where they lead and all that stuff. So I suppose that's a kind of progress, but it still feels wrong to say anything that's stronger here than a little.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's definitely wrong to say there hasn't been any.
Well,
Um, but yeah, the next question is, oh, someone seems to be saying, it's not a survey if it only has one question. Hold on, hold on. Second question, zombies, inconceivable, conceivable but not metaphysically possible, or metaphysically possible. Note
uh,
for anyone who's worried about the people around them not being real, physically possible was not an option there.
right. Yeah. So for anybody who's not familiar with this concept, a philosophical zombie, as opposed to like a George Romero zombie, is a person who is behaviorally and neurologically indistinguishable from anybody else. So they're going to act exactly the way anybody else would act. If you did a scan of their brain, all the same stuff would be going on there that's going on with with anybody else. But they don't have any mental states. There's no so there's a famous phrase from Thomas Nagel. It's the like what is like, right? Like Nagel's is what it's like to be a bat, right? That's something that's supposed to be in principle unknowable, according to Nagel, for those of us without sonar. And in and so there's supposed to be just like nothing that it would be like to be a philosophical zombie. That's the defining thing about them, that they don't experience anything. They act like they do, and they have all the same neurological correlates, of those actions that anybody else would have, but there's no but there's nothing going on there. There are no conscious states. And I guess I am. All right. So the options were inconceivable, conceivable, metaphysically impossible, and metaphysically possible.
Yeah, and I guess half the question here is, what do you think that metaphysical possibility is something other than conceivability?
Yeah, I mean, this one is really hard for me to answer because I think that I feel like I'm never 100% on what people mean by metaphysical possibility. Like there are ways of gesturing at it that like make give me a brief.
Especially as distinct from logically possible.
Yeah, exactly. So
It's some
like,
kind of category which is more constrained than logical, but less constrained than physical.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So like Alvin Plantinga in his book God, Freedom, and Evil has makes this distinction, where the way he brings up basically metaphysical possibility there. He talks about narrow logical possibility and broad logical possibility, um, and where like something being broadly logically impossible is, I guess sort of what people mean by metaphysically impossible, but he gives some like examples that, again, when I think about examples, like for example the zombie thing, uh, I'm sort of tempted to nod along to conceivable but metaphysically impossible, because it's not just that, like, it feels like there's some strong sense in which there couldn't be philosophical zombies. And if you were really committed to certain views about Phil of mind, then you end up having to say, well, the strong sense is that it's literally an incoherent idea. And I have to say that feels wrong to me. It's like, well, it doesn't seem to be incoherent. It seems like I understand perfectly well what you're saying, right? When you say it, I can, I mean, to the extent that I can conceive of uh, other minds, having or not having experiences or whatever at all, right? I do seem to be able to conceive of this just fine, but it does seem like there's like some sort of strong fundamental sense in which that's impossible. Um, it's not just like, oh, there don't happen to be any of those, that they and or like it's not even that if the sort of physical world were slightly different, than we would have. But it's not like it just seems like, I don't know. Maybe I am talking myself into metaphysically conceivable, metaphysically impossible. Even though,
Um,
don't ask me what the fuck metaphysically impossible actually means.
have you heard the zombie argument for physicalism,
I don't think so. How does this go?
which is basically the idea that if you're talking about this thing which you call consciousness, um, but this thing consciousness can be dispensed of without changing any feature of human behavior, then this thing that you're talking about, which might not be physical, is just some like fake thing which doesn't matter and is irrelevant. And so we shouldn't worry about it and just think physicalism is true.
Sure. Um, and as the sign in Fox Mulder's office says, I want to believe. I'm not. I'm not totally sure uh, that quite tracks to me, because, like, I mean, as much as the structure of the argument feels like something I might nod along to in other contexts, it also sure does seem like we have mental states of some sort or another, and and it doesn't really, you
Right, but
know,
I think the point is to get across that yeah, there is this thing called consciousness or whatever, but the one that kind of non-physicalists are talking about is some weird thing which doesn't seem to actually matter.
yeah, yeah. I guess I'm not totally sure what I think about that. I mean, like, I mean, obviously, I do. I would be much happier uh, believing that whatever consciousness is, it's not some like magical non-physical nonsense. Um, so I don't know. I have whether this is a good way of establishing that or not, I'm less sure.
The next question is cosmological fine tuning. What explains this? And we've talked about this a bit before. Design, multiverse, brute fact, or no fine tuning. Because Ben does think that fine tuning is like kind of the most reasonable argument for a designer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the argument that certainly, at least intuitively, tugs at me the most. Um, I'm a little unclear about the difference between brute fact and no fine tuning here, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question is the brute fact people would accept that the world is fine tuned for humans, but say that there's no further explanation for why that's the case. While no fine tuning people would say that there just is no fine tuning.
Right, but I mean, like, if you say like it is a fact that there are various physical constants that if they were slightly different, uh, humans couldn't exist. And in fact, it's even a fact that if there are various physical constants, that if they were very slightly different, um, biological life doesn't seem like it could exist. Like anything that's there's a pretty broad sense of things like us that couldn't exist. I mean, if you sort of hear this and you think, oh, well, things like us couldn't exist, but some kind of weird alien could or something, I think you probably haven't yet sort of gotten uh, just how different the universes where the physical constants would be different were. Um, so yeah, I mean, in that sense, that there's fine tuning exists. I mean, I don't know what it would mean to deny it in that sense. I mean, just to make a weird wrong assertion about physics that's like, no, actually, we could totally exist if you set the dials differently. I assume that's not what no fine tuning means. I mean, if no fine tuning means there is like literally no fine tuning in the sense that there's no like fine tuner, uh, like nobody is like doing the fine tuning, then presumably all of the options except except just accepting that God exists or some version of no fine tuning. But anyway, all this nitpicking. I'm I guess brute fact. I mean, like I think there might very well be a multiverse. That's an empirical question. I wouldn't presume to weigh in on one way or the other, but I don't particularly think that the um, I don't particularly think the apparent fine tuning of physical constants gives us like I don't really accept the idea that it gives us like the choice between accepting the existence of a fine tuner and accepting the existence of a multiverse. I think that I think that I just don't think we can conclude much of anything from it, just because the sort of counter argument to fine tuning I find most persuasive is the that for literally any way that the universe could be, well, you could have a fine tuner who wanted it to be just that way, and so the fact that it's that way and not any of the other ways is would be equally good evidence for a fine tuner, right? I mean, so it's and yeah, the sort of the argument I was having with my friend Gareth in the comments on the post a long time ago where I talked about this was sure the sort of macro state of the universe being friendly to life is something that is extremely unlikely, and that might feel like a better argument than just the universe is in this particular micro state, and it's like okay, but like any particular micro state would be equally unlikely, so that has no evidential value. That's like saying, I got the cards were dealt and I got the 8 of hearts, and there's only a 1 in 52 chance of that, so therefore the dealer was cheating. Well, there will only be a 1 in 52 chance of whatever card I got, right? So like Garrett's argument is that argument only applies to the microstates of the universe, but it's this interesting like macro level fact that the universe is amenable to life, and that's different because it's not that like any macro level fact would be equally unlikely. But I'm not totally convinced by that. I think one, if there is a fine tuner, like if this is supposed to be an argument for the existence of a fine tuner that we would otherwise have no reason to suspect would exist, then we're starting out with zero information about that fine tuner's preferences.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't seem like that they created the universe for humans. Like their design created the possibility of our living, but we turned up like 5 billion years later, whatever. So
Yeah, and it's also like, which is the other thing too, that it's also like, well, this one teensy tiny little piece of the universe is is reasonably life friendly enough that 5 billion years in it could emerge there, but the other 99.99999% of the universe is radically hostile to life. So if your goal was for life to emerge. I mean, this is a sort of weird way of doing it. I think that, yeah, I also just think that it's not, if we don't know anything about a hypothetical fine tuner's preferences, well, look, there could be any number of other macro states that would also be very unlikely, right? That don't exist. I mean, I don't know that I have the creativity to come up with what all of them would be. I think the one I suggested back then is there's like a, prime number of atoms in the universe or whatever. But that and and also, for all we know, again, since unless we're being anthropomorphic about this and assuming that this mysterious being that could fine tune the universe would have preferences that we understand for some reason, then look, why not think that the fine tuner cares about the microstate? Like, why think that their preferences are on the level of macrostate? So anyway, all this, I know we should move on to the next one, but I guess brute fact.
Because I say no fine tuning.
I might say that if I understood the difference between the two.
Okay. This one's a fun one. Hard problem of consciousness. And the possible answers. Oh, it's hard problem of consciousness. Is there one? Yes or no?
Yes,
Oh, you think so?
I do think so. Yeah, I
Because
think
I
there's
don't.
okay. Yeah, and I think
Um,
there is a hard problem of consciousness. I think that I mean, this is, in a way, this is just the zombie thing again. That so the hard problem of consciousness is supposed to be basically the, like, that
I
what
mean,
it is
it
like.
also is. People will use it in different ways. Like people will say, like, we'll use it to mean like, I don't know. Like one common way of seeing, I don't know, like, is to say like, why is there qualia or why is there phenomenal states?
Right. Yeah, that's roughly how I was taking it. Yeah. So yeah, so qualia is again roughly the what it is like to, the what it is like thing, that um, it seems like, if I don't know, I accidentally bang my hand against the wall, you can have this description of like everything that's going on in my brain and nervous system, there, and it doesn't, and it sort of feels like there's this further fact that I'm feeling pain, and um if, I mean, a really good solution to the hard problem would take the form of explaining, like, why it's misguided to think that that's a further fact, right? That's like, no, actually, you're just thinking about this wrong. Actually, this is all, part and parcel. This is like the stuff we described before actually, like, includes in some way the answer to this. This isn't a further thing. And yeah, we kind of talked about this a little bit last time we did this, but I mean, my position is, I don't really have a very well worked out position on this, but like, I think that I think there are all sorts of good reasons to think that some sort of materialism must be true about minds. I think, like, again, the sort of crass way I put it before is like, I don't really think mental states are magic, um, but thinking that there are good reasons to think that some form of materialism is going to turn out to be true is not really the same thing as saying that, like, I there's some sort of materialism that's on the table that I'm totally
Well,
convinced
the
is
hard
right.
problem, the hard problem is hard, um, not because various of the problems about consciousness are easy in any obvious way. They're very, very hard, but the hard problem is particularly hard because the point of it is that it can't be resolved. If we take it to be true, then these questions about phenomenal consciousness and qualia can't be resolved by science, um, and that's why the hard question is hard.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, I think that there's a sense in which it can't. I mean, presumably it's a little bit, feel a little bit squeamish about pronouncing in advance about, what future science will do, but like, the apparent sense in which it's hard to see how the hard problem could be solved by scientific advances is just that it seems to be a, conceptual problem that, like, that it it could be that some scientific advances could help us think about this more clearly in some way. I'm not, I'm certainly not ruling that out, but I just
Well,
think
I mean,
that,
I think that the whole problem will dissolve as many problems have previously. For instance, what elan vital makes people live? What substance or essence or thing distinguishes living things from dead things? We search for this thing for a very long time, and as it turns out, there is no elan vital. There's nothing which particularly makes alive things distinct from dead things in any hard way. Rather, life is just an emergent category of various underlying processes, and that we can categorize some of these things as living and not living. And what I suspect, and what people who reject the hard problem say, is that something similar will happen to phenomenal consciousness. Yes, it does seem at this moment that there's no obvious way where it could be resolved by science, but rather just through a series, the problem will resolve because through a series of iterative question answerings, we'll find out all these various facts about consciousness, and this problem of what is qualia or whatever will dissolve.
yeah, I mean, the plausibility of that, I think, gets down to the plausibility of thinking that consciousness is like that, right? That like it could be, that like eventually we realize that um, that there just is no thing. There is that consciousness just doesn't exist in the way that we thought it did before, the same way that we might have thought that life existed, but now we just realize that this is, we still use the word life, but we're not, it's not that this is a sort of category in the way that we once thought it was. Yeah, I mean, all I can really say about that is I'll believe it when I see it, or maybe my descendants will. But I think, yeah, I
Right,
mean,
but signing up to the hard problem is a really big claim. It's the claim that what I'm saying now will never ever be right.
um, are you saying that if you say this, the hard problem is real? I mean, I think that, I
I
mean,
think if
because
you're
it's
saying
something.
a problem can't be resolved by science, you mean that if you
So
just mean it can't be resolved by 2023 science, then I agree that there's a hard problem. But like, I don't think
yeah,
that's the point of it.
I mean, I'm not even sure that the Elan Vital analogy is one where it's literally not just resolved by science. I mean, there's sort of conceptual component there too.
Oh, sure. Like, obviously, philosophy will participate in this dissolving.
Sure. Okay. Do I think, if you ask me right now, do I buy the dissolving prediction? My answer is no.
Cool.
I think, is that exactly the same as being totally confident about it? Probably also no. I mean, I mean, I think a lot of this mind stuff. My no, the answer is no, Shawnee. Sorry. The Yeah, I mean, a lot of this mind stuff. I mean, my feeling is like, so there's this line, right, where I think Huxley says that Darwin let people be intellectually fulfilled atheists. That I don't quite feel like I'm a intellectually fulfilled materialist about minds, right? I'd like to be, right? But just yet I'm not, right? Again, I think that some sort of purely materialist view, I think there are good reasons to expect and hope that that turns out to be the case. But I don't know.
I haven't been tracking so far who's right, by which we mean which philosophers said which percentage of philosophers said so. But in this case, Hassan is right that most philosophers, including most physicalists, agree with Ben. Though it was about 30% for me, which was heartening because I thought it was probably even a smaller position than that.
Fair enough.
The next question: human genetic engineering, permissible or impermissible? Well, Ben thinks I'll say permissible.
Of course you will. Uh, I'll just say impermissible and let this go with no further explanation. Next question.
I was going to say that obviously there's a great deal of problems, but I'm not going to categorically rule the idea out, especially like in communism or whatever.
Yeah, right. Maybe I'm squeamish about it. I don't know that I have a knockdown argument that they would never be permissible, but but just for the sake of having a definitive answer, let's just say impermissible.
Mind uploading, survival or death?
Death.
Yeah, death. Very obviously death, I think. Like way more than like teletransported, like very obviously death.
Yeah.
You're in a small minority on the genetic engineering question, by the way.
Oh, interesting. How small?
20%.
Wow. Okay. Uh, eh, fair enough.
Ought implies can.
Yes, for some senses of can.
So this is one where it's very strongly yes, but I'm quite kind of sus of, and yeah, I think the correct answer is like for certain things of can, especially such that morality is meant to be like a general subset of rules for humans, but what in fact humans can variously do is concretely variable
Yeah,
and
I
will
mean,
vary into the future.
again, I think it depends on the value of can. That there are certain ways in which you have to be able to do something for it to make sense to say that that you should. Um,
Right.
so
So it's kind of it's not there can never be a moral obligation for you to fly up upon your wings to the top of a skyscraper to save a burning child, up until the point
exactly.
we invent genetic engineering, which gives you wings or a jetpack.
Ooh, yeah. Now I want to change my previous answer. Uh, but yeah, no. I mean, if you do, yeah. I mean, if you do have wings, or you can shoot spider webs out of your wrist, then you do have an obligation to go up to the top of the building to save the burning child. With great power comes great responsibility. With less
Someone did
power comes less responsibility.
someone did once ask on r/ask philosophy, does anyone say that can implies or? And I was like, how could that work?
Yeah, anything that you can do, you ought to do. Would be a terrifying position.
Yeah. It also just, it's necessarily contradictory because we can do things which contradict each other.
Right.
Oh, I should have asked this. Sorry, this section isn't actually sorted. It shows how hard I work. Philosophical knowledge, is there any? None, a little, or a lot?
Yeah, there's a lot.
I mean, we can't say none because I don't think that's compatible with what we said about progress earlier.
No. No, but I mean, look, I think that, I mean, I guess the position you'd have to take, yeah, it's got to be at least a little bit. And I think arguably a lot. I think so, at least a little, since I do actually think, as rare as it is that this happens on really big, really interesting questions, that there are like really decisive arguments you could make on some things. It's like, oh, I mean, surely if we just learn that some position is incoherent, then we have gained the knowledge that that position is wrong. So I think that's good enough to establish a little. I think the distinction between a little and a lot. Um, yeah. So now the song lyrics are running through my head. For some little.
Running through my head, run through my head.
uh,
I mean,
so so
the amount of philosophers that said none is outnumbered 7-1 by the number who said that worms have consciousness.
yeah.
So it's not a big group.
Yeah, I mean, I think none is totally indefensible. I think a little and a lot are both defensible, but but the distinction is probably going to rely on how high you set the bar for knowledge. In other words, uh, I mean, assuming that there are lots of questions on which somebody's right, so there are at least people who have true beliefs, and then if some of them arrived at those true beliefs by what are objectively good arguments, then that seems like justified true belief. And so, but you might still think that kind of justified true belief isn't knowledge because it's not a high enough bar of justification. You have to be more sure or something like that. And I guess I think a little and a lot are both defensible answers, but for the sake of for the sake of satisfying the chat's angry demands for definitive answers, I'll say a lot.
Nice. Well, that does pray well for the rest of the video, especially if you're one of the bearers of this law of knowledge.
Right. I don't know about that. I didn't say that. Okay, let's keep going.
Principle of sufficient reason. Is it true or is it not? I mean, it's definitely not metaphysically true. Like, I'm not committed to position such that I could be embarrassed by a physicist.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I don't know. So if you say there are different I think there are different formulations of the principle of sufficient reason where the differences might actually make a big difference here. That so like if you say, well, everything that ever happens is caused by something to happen, then is that true? Certainly if you think that there's like genuine deep quantum randomness, I love the Copenhagen interpretation, then why did A happen instead of B? That there really isn't a causal reason for that. I think there's certainly.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't really realized it, but I guess there is certainly at least one way where PCR would be false under like chancy determinism. Like, if you imagine if you live in a world where when you hit a wall with a hammer, half the time it breaks and half the time it doesn't because you live in a chancy world. I hadn't previously thought that as violating PSR, but I guess it does because there's no further fact to explain why some of the hammer strikes crack the wall and some don't.
Yeah, if you have a version of PCR that just says that, well, there's going to be a reason instead of in terms of how the world works, why this happened, and if you understand that in a weak enough way, that, well, given the way the world works, half the time that will happen counts as a reason why it happened. Then sure, PCR is fine. But to the extent that it doesn't quite seem like that's what people mean, which it often doesn't quite seem like that's what people mean, then no. There's no, that would be like, now whether or not the principle of sufficient reason is true, whether there's a sort of explicable reason every time something happens why that thing and not anything else happened, that could just be like, well, that's not my department. I'll just wait for physicists to tell me.
Yeah. At least the universe is very PSR as it goes.
Yeah,
sure. We came to it.
There are certainly incredibly broad categories of facts, including nearly all of the interesting ones that you are going to be able to say, well, okay, either this just sort of logically had to be this way, which counts, or here's like a causal reason why. That's, given how little of my life is spent thinking about protons, there's sort of like, if the PCR isn't true on that level, it sort of might as well be.
Someone asked, what is the difference between materialism and physicalism? They are mainly used interchangeably in contemporary analytic philosophy. Though generally physicalism is used more.
Yeah, and I think also part of the reason physicalism is used more is that, so.
Right, and then often physicalism is then defined as everything that exists follows the laws of physics.
Right, yeah. Exactly, and materialism, I think, is a word that's just used in more context to mean more things. right?
Right, by that dirty Marxist behind you.
Yeah, exactly, right. So, yeah, the materialism in that sense, I think, is 100% for sure true. But keep going.
The next one will probably be a shrug of the shoulders from us beyond kind of like aesthetic preferences, which I think is a fun conversation to have. Quantum mechanics, collapse, like objective collapse, hidden variables, many worlds, or epistemic.
How the fuck should I know?
Aesthetically, I prefer many worlds because it preserves determinism, though it leads to a multiplication of entities, which I really don't like. But I really want to hold on to determinism,
So why not hidden variables?
because it doesn't seem true.
Well, okay.
Well, and I mean, anyway, like you need to. We haven't proven that hidden variables is false, but we have proven that you can't have hidden local real variables. Um, what no, was it local? Basically, like hidden variables which don't need you to then question various other things that we think are normally intuitively true about physics. You don't have an aesthetic preference for like things you prefer to be true. Like, would you prefer, that there not to be many worlds, or you would prefer determinism not to be true than not to be randomness?
I guess aesthetically, I like determinism, but I don't particularly like many worlds. I suppose I don't know. I suppose actually like objective collapse might be the might be the least aesthetically displeasing option for me.
But also probably the one that seems most false.
Yeah, I have no idea. This is all well outside of my pay grade.
This is a fun one. Rational agreement. Can two people with the same evidence rationally disagree? Or
Disagree.
you what? The options are non-permissivism or permissivism. Basically, can that be a thing or can it not be a thing? And I think the question here, most people on the survey have gone for permissible, but I guess I think that's because they have a narrow idea of kind of evidence,
Uh
which is to
huh.
say, like, I think they think that there is, we can talk about evidence, but also like values or something else. And in that case, if you have different values but same evidence, then yeah, it's certainly permissible to disagree. But if we take information in a broader sense to mean like, also being correct about our values and whatever, and having the same information in that way, then I think it's definitely not permissible.
Yeah, I mean, my instinct is to say permissible. That I think like I mean, certainly, look, there's some sense in which just intuitively we all think like, hey, I mean, a sentence I have said countless times about different subjects is this is something on which there's room for reasonable people to disagree. Um, is that does that mean that I think that it's always that what I really mean is that it's sort of forgivable that we don't all have exactly the same evidence or something. Maybe I don't know. I mean, I think that there's I mean, I think that the question here is probably less about the evidence part than the rationally part, right? Like in other words, um, given all the same information, um, if different people weigh some of that information differently,
Oh, they
uh,
equally as rationally as each other.
exactly, yeah, and yeah, it's a really hard question. I think whether they're doing it because I think that I think that it's at least plausible that there are if we were going to compare a sort of bunch of different like belief formation mechanisms for see okay there are obviously many cases where one set of belief formation procedures is clearly more rational than another. uh, But is it always going to be the case that if two are different, then it's like, oh, well, that one is the one that's more rational than the
Right.
other. And I'm not confident that that's true. I think that it's at least plausible that, it's at least plausible that there are different kind of epistemic values. Again, I'm not advocating for a free for all pluralism here that, like, you know, decide what to believe however you like, it's all equally good or equally bad. I think that would clearly be crazy. But is it possible that you have, is it possible that, once you get to, like, especially because, we do, when we use this word rationality, we're gesturing at the very least two different epistemic goals, which are believing true things and not believing false things. And maybe more than that, but like certainly at least those two. And it could be that you have one set of belief formation procedures that is slightly better at at netting true beliefs, but slightly worse at excluding false ones, and vice versa. And we say, and say, okay, is one of these more rational than the other? Maybe not, right? And it could even be that there are two sets of belief formation procedures where they're both about equally, like over the long term, they're both exactly equally as good at
Right.
both achieving truth and avoiding falsehood. But in particular cases, they'll come to different conclusions. I don't know how to rule any of that out, so I'm going to say permissive.
This is a fun one, but one where I don't know what most of the answers mean. Maybe you know, maybe you don't. Response to external world skepticism, which is strongest? Um, Abductive, contextualist, dogmatist, epistemic, externalist, semantic Oh, sorry, it was epistemic externalist, not two separate things. Semantic externalist, or pragmatic.
Good Lord. Yeah, I'm just thinking about whether, like, I would even, if pressed, be able to explain every single one of those options. And I think probably not. I uh I mean, I guess so. So just to pick one of them, and instead of spending the next 20 minutes with the two of us trying to explain as many of those as between us we can. Um,
I mean, most people don't even know what abduction is, though it's obvious ones you know.
yeah. So I mean, so abduction is inference the best explanation. So generally the idea is that you have, um, like, it's more or less always going to be the case with regard to anything that has to do with, like, the empirical world, that you have probably lots of other things too, that you're going to have multiple explanations that all fit all of the evidence. um, Certainly in science that's always true, right? That you can always come up with multiple theories that that like are logically consistent with all the evidence. um, and so the it's the way, on one popular sort of understanding of what rational belief formation is, what we're always doing, even if it's not always, it's not always conscious, because there are lots of things we rule out so quickly we just don't even think, like they would just never occur to us in the first place because we know to rule them out. But to the extent that we're rational, what we're doing is we're comparing different explanations and seeing which one, not which is the one that uniquely is consistent with the evidence, but which one sort of best explains the evidence, in the sense that it's the simplest explanation in some, and like there are different kinds of simplicity that might be relevant, or there are, or it explains it in a way that's sort of most fruitful in terms of generating, future other predictions, or there might be other criteria that you could use to decide things. So, like, when I'm yeah, I think is sort of our rejection of external world skeptical scenarios, like I'm really a brain in a jar, being subject to elaborate, electrochemical simulation to make me think that I'm sitting at my desk in an apartment in Los Angeles talking to Stefan on YouTube. Is my rejection of that ultimately a sort of great big inference, the best explanation? Maybe. I mean, I'm also pretty friendly to epistemic externalism. That in some sense, like, so I think we talked about this last time, but like kind of in the sense that I think Hume was, where if you read the Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding, he says all this stuff about how we can't sort of establish with arguments, that the our stream of experiences um, are caused by an external world, and there are these cause and effect relationships, and blah 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 blah. But some people just key in on those passages and say, oh, so he's advocating skepticism, and they just ignore all the passages where he's like, obviously only a fool or a madman would actually believe that any of these scenarios are true.
Hume was skeptical of miracles, like he was equally skeptical as everything else.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Hume was skeptical of miracles. Hume was not skeptical of the existence of an external world or relations of cause and effect. He obviously believed in all that. In fact, his argument against miracles relies on all sorts of assumptions about cause and effect. He argues for determinism in the Liberty and Necessity chapter on free will and determinism. So yeah, but I mean, so what I take like Hume to be saying is that there are certain basic beliefs that we have that we can't really justify with arguments, which is not to say that we shouldn't believe them. There's clearly some sense in which it's irrational not to. It's just not a internal sense. It's not a sense we can get under the hood of and take a look at. It's a external sense. It's that our belief forming machinery wouldn't be working properly if we didn't if we didn't sort of attribute various things to an external world and cause and effect relationships and all that stuff. So that one seems like there's something that seems very reasonable about that to me. But if we can come up with a good argument for the existence of the external world, so much the better.
I mean, I've got a very continental answer to this one, which is believing fundamentally in kind of like human thrownness into the world. That kind of it's just immediately obvious that we're thrown into this world where we confront other real beings, and the only way to kind of deny this is to engage in like an incredibly active intellectual process, which is totally divorced from your entire rest of your life, to try and get yourself to like briefly take the possibility seriously. And the way to kind of defeat that is just to stop doing that thing.
Yeah, I mean that sort of seems like that sort of seems like what I just said. Translated to continental philosophy speak. Which I approve of. I'm very ecumenical that way.
This was one we hadn't done at the point where I wrote this document, but we have now, though we haven't completed it. Temporal ontology, presentism, internalism, or growing block theory. This is a good preview if you're going to end up doing this next week.
Yeah, eternalism. So for anybody who didn't watch the stream last week, presentism is the claim that only the present moment exists. Eternalism is the claim that it all exists, and there are kinds of presentism. There's a way of sort of splitting the difference and saying it all exists, but like only one bit of it has the special property of being now objectively. Whereas other eternalists are tenseless theorists, so they think that it all exists in exactly the same way. That there's nothing that's ontologically privileged about it, about one particular bit of it. It's just sort of like, yes, clearly, that when I say now, I just mean the part I'm in, and when I say the past, I mean the part that's before that, and when I say the future, I mean the part that's after it. But it all has the same ontological status, right? The sort of the same existence status. And then growing block theory is the view that basically that says that there's that the past exists the way that the eternalist thinks it does, but the future doesn't yet. At any given moment, the like right now, the stuff that right now there's no like all the stuff that happened before now exists, but nothing after it exists. Which I actually think might sort of end up being the most incoherent option. But this one, Shani, or I was told I'm mispronouncing your name. I apologize. I don't remember what the correct pronunciation is right now. I will satisfy the demand for decisiveness, because this one I actually do feel legitimately decisive about. This is not like me pretending to have a definitive answer to the human genetic engineering question. Eternalism. It's and really the strong version of eternalism, that there's no sense in which July 23rd, 2023 has some like special metaphysical status that's different from July 23rd, 2022, or July 23rd.
I mean, we also said this on July 16th, so it doesn't seem very special.
Exactly.
Shani says you're doing it right.
Oh, okay, very good. All right, I don't know why I was convinced it was wrong, but anyway.
Unit of selection, gene or organism?
Gene.
Yeah, I think it's gene, but I don't know I don't understand the debate.
Yeah, obviously,
kind of genes come bundled together in organisms.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you that, like, to the extent that I understand the debate, I would say gene, because
Jean Bajolan is the unit selection.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, certainly when we're sort of on a rough intuitive level, when we're describing how Darwinian evolution works, we talk about it as if it's the organisms themselves that are being selected for, but it feels to me like, well, okay, but if we want to be like really precise and picky, we would say that it's the genes that are being selected for.
Abstract objects, Platonism or nominalism? This is the second. Well, it's the second to last of the second tier. There was 4 more questions after that, but we're going up to an hour, so we'll probably just do these last 2.
Nominalism.
Yeah, I think nominalism too, but it's obviously it's not just something where you can be like nominalism for sure, definitely, because you then kind of you run into problems of kind of like, well, we certainly treat these things as if they have kind of an existence apart from any particular instance of them.
Yeah. So right. So the like abstract objects, just to help ground this, like maybe the most interesting and plausible kind of abstract objects are mathematical objects, numbers and sets. And on some views, numbers just are sets, but that's maybe not worth getting into right now. And sort of the strongest argument. So Platonism is the view that these exist independently of our minds, but also they're not like reducible in some way to material facts. That they have their own sort of existence. Nominalism says no, they don't. And so the best reason to be a Platonist, I mean, so Willard Van Orman Quine, the most important philosopher who non-philosophers have never heard of, has this argument. It's not unique to him. I think it actually originally comes from Hilary Putnam, but like it's maybe most associated with Quine. It's the indispensability argument that basically says, well, look, if you want to believe that all our best scientific theories are true, these we sort of don't know how to even like translate those theories into a form that's not just soaking in math. So you best hope that the mathematical statements are true too, and so you need to either explain them in some sort of way that doesn't involve Platonism about mathematical objects, um, or just become, in Quine's phrase, a grudging Platonist. Say like, okay, I guess I do have to admit, mathematical objects in the ontology. And yeah, I mean, I do think that's by far the best argument for some sort of Platonism. I think so. There are attempts to sort of meet the challenge. Hartree-Field has a book called Mathematics Without Numbers that tries to do this for not like all of science, but tries to at least tries to at least explain how like some scientific things that it seems like you can only express mathematically, in principle you could express non-mathematically. But and I think there's like an open debate there that I don't claim to have all the answers about. But I mean, if why
I
the
mean,
answer?
it's kind of similar to the kind of problem of minds with physicalism and non-physicalism, right? Because
Yeah,
you can admit there's problems with physicalism, but then when someone tries to put across an actual non-physicalist perspective, you also then run into even bigger problems. Like, for
yeah,
instance, if we say that mathematical objects are real abstract objects, then how do we know about them? What's the causal connection between our brains and them? And that's just
exactly,
like an immense problem.
exactly. Yeah, there's a so Jody Azuni has a book. Uh, trying to trying to see if I can find it because I did. I think it's Tracking Reason, maybe. Anyway, there's a. I think it's Tracking Reason, but anyway, one of Jody Azuni's books, he has this sort of challenge to Platonists, where it's like, okay, let's say that there is this sphere of abstract mathematical objects that exists in some way that's not that's not part of physical reality. Um, Imagine that it ceased to exist tomorrow. What would change? And and how would we know? Well, what would be different? Whatever. Uh, and the and I think there's like maybe a footnote or something where he's like, hey, I don't remember who he attributed this to. It could just be an anonymous friend who says, well, maybe uh, mathematicians would suddenly not be able to do proofs or something like that, and that just seems obviously wrong.
Right.
Like, I mean, I bet so in my book, the Logic Without Gaps or Gluts, I mentioned this and have a joke in there about how you know, like you would basically have to think that mathematicians had some sort of like really weird extra human sensory powers to for this to make any sense. And perhaps because my mom is a retired math professor, and I sort of suspect her of being a regular member of the human race. I'm very reluctant to accept this one. So yeah, I think that the idea, like, whatever is going on when we do mathematics, and then when we use mathematics to do science, I mean, it seems like there are real and hard problems here. I don't want to be glib about, and I don't want to claim to have all the solutions to, but it just doesn't seem like the answer is going to be that no. It turns out that there are these things that exist outside of space and time, but somehow when chemicals slosh around in my brain, they make contact with them.
So, last question, but also there's going to be a bonus question which actually has yes or no answers, which is a demographic question, which is triggered by you mentioning Quine. The final question, the real question, is experience machine, would you enter yes or no?
No.
I would say no, but only because, basically we don't have communism yet. And not everyone's getting in with me. That's the problem. It's not living in an experience machine, which is the problem. I'm happy to
Okay.
jack into the matrix, but not right now.
Yeah. Okay. So we do have a deep disagreement on this. So the experience machine, really quickly, for anybody who's not familiar with it, is um, from Robert Nozick. This is a ultimately for his purposes, it's an anti-utilitarian argument, but the premise of classical utilitarianism is attacking isn't anything that's directly ethical. It's just the premise that the only thing that's sort of good in itself is happiness. The only thing that's really bad in itself is suffering. And people like John Stuart Mill, when they're arguing for this, they'll say, well, look, nobody who thinks that anything else is intrinsically valuable is really being serious, because nobody ever really values anything except for happiness. Ultimately, you value other things, but you think that's because they'll lead to more happiness, less suffering. And so Nozick's counter argument is, says, no, we obviously do care about quite a bit about happiness and avoid suffering. That's not the only thing we care about. And for example, if somebody offered you that you could plug into this experience machine that your brain would be hooked into, and it'd give you this comprehensive alternate fake reality in which your life would be better than it would be outside. And I always tell students, if what you're thinking is, yeah, but it wouldn't be satisfying because I would know it wasn't real, we could just stipulate that the first thing the experience machine does to your brain, like let's say you're told about the experience machine, you have 5 minutes to decide whether to go in, and the first thing that the machine will do to your brain once you plug in is erase the memory of the last 10 minutes. So and we're imagining that this is so good that you will never suspect, right? It's not that you'll have some vague lingering, like in a science fiction movie, right? That's like something always seems off or whatever. No. You're not taking this seriously, right? Nothing seems off, right? You will 100% believe for the rest of your life that this is reality, and you'll be happier than you would be otherwise. And, look, are there circumstances in which I might take that? Sure. Right. Like there are, like if my life was like really, really going to be like really, really awful, right? I was like the last, we were in a different kind of science fiction movie. I was the last human alive on Earth. And, I was just going to, like, over the course of the next 10 years, slowly die of radiation poisoning or whatever. Would I prefer to spend those last 10 years in this alternate reality that I wouldn't know was an alternate reality? Yeah, I would, right? So it's not an absolute thing. But, like, I think what I mean when I say no, wouldn't go to the experience machine is I agree with Nozick's point. I think that we do value other things. So it's and really the way of showing this is, like, imagine that the experience machine only made you like 0.5% happier, than you'd be without it. Would you even be particularly tempted? And I think probably not, right? I think for
or like some kind of like flat, boring kind of like heroin happiness.
Yeah, well, that's true too, right? I mean, like, I think maybe the utilitarian, or like really the premise of utilitarianism, classical utilitarianism we're talking about here, is hedonism, not in the Futurama hedonism bot sense, wine, women, and song, but in the sense of thinking, happiness is the only thing that's ultimately valuable in itself, not just instrumentally valuable because it leads to more happiness. So what the hedonist would say, I think the hedonist would have resources to resist the flat heroin happiness that's in and out, but like the kind of happiness I'm talking about is like fuller and richer somehow, fine, right? But like, I don't think having experiences of the sort we value is the only thing that we value. I think that we also value being connected, not a sense of connection, because that's just experience, but we value actually being connected to objective external reality, and we also value various moral things, etc. So I think, like, if the question was, all right, we've achieved fully automated luxury communism, in the most extreme sense, in the sense that we probably never will, like literally no work has to be done by any humans anywhere to keep everything going and everybody fed and all that. And we're trying to, hey, should all of us go, should all of us plug into this fake reality? I suspect that most people probably wouldn't want to, or if they did, they certainly wouldn't want to if it was only going to be 1% better or whatever, because we do actually care about other stuff.
Dog.
Yes.
Okay, and so this final question, I think, is probably the most fun one of the whole thing. So there's a list on the Phil Paper survey of non-living philosophers identified with. It's kind of, who people said is their most important philosopher. They could only give one response, and then it lists them by the number of respondents who said it. I want you to guess who the top 10 are, and I'll tell you where they actually rank.
Good God. So I'm supposed to list the top 10 of people's answers to most important non-living philosophers.
Yeah, most important for them, like most influential on them.
Right, most important for them. Okay, so this is right. To be clear, this is not a question about what I think about any of this. This is just
this is demographic guessing of analytic philosophers.
Demographic guessing. Okay,
which
Plato.
I think is fun. What did you say?
Plato.
Plato's actually 10th.
Wow. Okay, so just barely right, but only barely. That's interesting.
Yeah, right.
I would have thought it could be higher. Kant.
Kant is 3rd.
Okay, so that's 2 for 2. Aristotle.
Aristotle is 1st.
Okay, so that's 3. Oh, that's interesting. Actually, I don't know that would have. Hume.
Hume is 2nd.
Okay, so that's 4.
It's going well
so far.
Have you seen what chat's saying?
Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris. Yeah. Well, I would just point out that beyond anything else wrong with that, unless there's news that that I wasn't on Twitter enough this morning to get, both of those people are still alive.
Well, you've got to guess Quine, right? This is why I'm doing the question.
Quine.
You saying Quine? Quine is 7th.
Okay, so Quine's on the list. So we're up to 5 of the 10.
Yeah, 5 out of 5 too, which is impressive.
Bertrand Russell.
Russell is 9th.
Okay, so that's 6. Yeah, I've also burned through most of the easiest ones already. Let me think about this. Okay, non-living. So we're up to 6.
They're all. I think they're all 20th century or like late 19th century.
Frege.
Frege, yep. Frege is 7th.
Okay, so that's 7.
This is going incredibly shockingly well. Ben knows his fellow philosophers very well.
Better or worse? Wittgenstein?
Yep. 4th, I think. I'm just typing to someone in chat.
So we're up to 8.
5th, sorry. There's someone else at 4th.
All right. Now I'm just kind of trying to think by categories. So we're doing.
I think that the 2 which are left are both people who would fit in the Quine category of not heard of by normal people, but very famous for philosophers.
Okay. Interesting. Okay.
Someone's also saying that Zizek is dead. I want you to just get one wrong.
Yeah. Got an email from that guy like a week ago, so if he died, it would have to be like just now. Fairly sure I wouldn't have missed that this morning. All right. God.
Ben's trying harder on this question than any of the others.
I want to get them all right. Okay, I'm going into territory where I think, yeah. So this is probably Hillary Putnam.
Not Putnam.
No, not Putnam. I got one wrong. Damn it. Okay.
Putnam is 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 22nd.
22nd. Jesus. All right. I just got. I was just totally off base there. Wow. Let's see. What the fuck would it be? These are both 20th century people?
Let me check. Yeah.
Jesus.
Who?
Rawls?
Rawls is 11th.
Ah, damn it.
Yeah, the last two are both 20th century. Do you want their death dates? As a hint.
Sure.
1970 and 2001.
1970 and 2001. Wow. Okay. Fuck died in 2001.
Also, no one in chat has said any of them, which is proving my thing about Quine.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to get the last two.
One was German speaking, one was American.
One was German speaking, one was American. I mean, you said people that non-philosophers haven't heard of. The German speaker isn't going to be like Heidegger.
Yeah. Well, that's continental bullshit. Remember, we're doing analytic.
Okay, we're doing analytic. Carnap.
Yep.
Okay.
So the last one is the American philosopher who died in 2001.
Yeah, I should have thought of Carnap way earlier. That's pretty bad. Okay.
Carnap was 8th, and this philosopher is 4th, and you haven't managed to say them. We've also done an episode on them.
We've also done an episode on them. Jesus. Okay. Wow. Oh, that's funny. David Lewis.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
David Lewis 4th.
I was doing so good for the first.
Don't be embarrassed. You did brilliantly, but then you forgot about David Lewis. I think he'd be like 18 hints.
Yeah. For some reason, I thought David Lewis died later than 2001. I don't know why, but actually, I do know why, and it's a little embarrassing. I think the reason why I thought David Lewis died later than 2001 is that I can remember first learning about
You think
him.
you're younger than you are.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. It's like in my head when I first learned about David Lewis, and I sort of probably vaguely knew that he'd only died quite recently. That wasn't as long ago as it was in objective reality. Oh man, I'm gonna think about that after the stream.
What rank do you think Marx has?
I don't know. I actually spent a lot of that thinking that I was saying Marx, but that I was gonna I knew I was gonna be depressed when you told me.
I mean, he's 14th.
Oh shit. Okay, well that's actually better than I would see. This is a respect in which my opinion of professional philosophers was actually lower than I mean,
he just barely beats out Socrates. He never wrote anything, so.
Okay, all right. If Marx is at 14 and beating Socrates, that's certainly a lot lower than where he should be, but that's also a lot higher than I would have expected.
11, 12, 13. The rest of the top 20 is Rawls, Mill, Aquinas, Marx, Socrates, Descartes, James, Parfit, Dewey, Davidson.
Well, the yep. Well, the record will reflect first 8.
You did brilliantly. You did brilliantly, Ben. And yeah, we can end on that. I don't know if there's. I think that's the only fun demographic question on here, so I can't
Yeah,
torture him with the rest in future.
I think that's probably a pretty good. That's probably a pretty good endpoint.
Cool. Well, bye everyone.